In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good. In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
The moment before you take the first step, before you find your courage, before you know what happens next, there's one moment that lets us know the time is now. And now it is time to think of tomorrow, to protect what we love. Now it is time to protect the future. Generali, in partnership with the United Nations Development Programme, is working to protect vulnerable communities around the world. The partnership will blend Generali's insurance expertise with UNDP's long-term focus on financing and development. Half of humanity is threatened by the consequences of climate change. Millions of people in the world lack access to financial protection, leaving them at risk of any disaster. Protect the future means ensuring that everyone has access to inclusive insurance for whatever hazards they face. Generali and the Insurance and Risk Finance Facility (IRFF) initiative, led by UNDP, are aligned with the Insure Resilience Vision 2025, which aims to protect 500 million people against the impact of climate change and disasters. Together, we will support vulnerable communities with accessible and affordable insurance and promote financial resilience for all. Protect the future is our way of making a difference. Now it is time to protect the future.
In the Anthropocene, we know we've got a narrowing window in which we need to take urgent action. To help us make better choices about the future we want, we're going to provide trustworthy information and data about the human impacts of climate change as an open public good.
Be permanent, with the weakest countries being left behind after decades of catching up. Our inability to manage shared global challenges like climate change and pandemics not only threatens our well-being, but also sows division, fear, and conflict around the world. No country alone can tackle challenges that spill across borders, whether a virus or a warming planet. And yet, we're stuck in gridlock, with paralysing polarization spreading everywhere. We cannot break this gridlock by turning inwards. We need to reimagine how we cooperate. We can start by building an institutional architecture that enhances the provision of global public goods, helping us to see the world as more than a zero-sum game and to come together on issues where it truly matters. We can help ease polarization by fighting misperceptions that keep us apart, and by giving people the means to feel more in control of their lives. We don't have to be swept up in a whirlwind of problems, sinking deeper with each disaster. We must do better. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, and to the planet.
Good morning and welcome to the home of the Human Safety Net. Welcome to the presentation of the Human Development Report. I'm personally very happy to welcome back UNDP here for another discussion on what altogether collectively we can do to address a lot of the interesting points that will be raised today, as you will learn from the report. Now, 2 weeks ago, not even, I was in Malaysia. We had a very, very nice event with UNDP about how we can support the resilience of SMEs. So it's very nice again within the framework of the partnership that Generali has with UNDP to be here again today to discuss the Human Development Report. Now, I think this is the first full report after the COVID pandemic, so I think it's very interesting, what we see and what comes out from there in terms of the divergent path of development of the countries and what each of us in our positions, whether we are academics, civil society or private companies, we can do to address these challenges. So I'm very looking forward to have this conversation with all the people that you will see now up in the program. I think we have a slide maybe with the different speakers here, if we could bring that up. But essentially, we will hear from many multilateral organizations, so OECD, UN, of course, UNDP, the Italian government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then we will have an address from my very dear colleague, Lucia Silva, Group Chief Sustainability Officer of Generali, to give a little bit the perspective of a financial company in terms of investment and insurance, in terms of protection and prevention that are key elements. And then finally, we will be in a panel where we will try, based on what Pedro brings out on the research, what can each of us do? So we have different voices there. I think it's very interesting. We have economists, psychologists, anthropologists, having each of them their perspective. Because I think if there's one thing that this report says is we cannot just look at it from an economic perspective. We need to be cross-sectorial, and we all need to chip in to do something about this. And where are we doing this? We're doing this in the home of the Human Safety Net, which is something that Generali created a few years ago, exactly to foster this kind of social innovation dialogue. So without further ado, I would very much like to welcome my dear colleague Lucia Silva up on stage for the opening remarks.
So, good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests. I'm really honored to open this European presentation of the UNDP Human Development Report. A warm welcome to our European institutions, to the Italian government representatives, to the members of the United Nations and USCD. And I think it's great that we are here together, because I think that together will be one of the key words that everyone should take away from this event. A special thanks also to the United Nations Development Programme, partnering with Generali for the reduction of the protection gap and the promotion of social economic well-being in all the vulnerable communities. And finally, a special thanks also to the Generali Human Safety Net for hosting us and also giving us an example on how to build a round relationship and really foster human development. And when reading the Human Development Report, there were a few numbers that really caught my attention. And please note, because 5 out of 10 people feel they don't have control in their lives. It's 50%, is a lot. And more, 7 in 10, think they don't have influence over their collective decision making. And we're living in a paradox. On one hand, our living conditions have improved a lot, actually. But on the other hand, this pervasive feeling of insecurity, uncertainty grows in our collective consciousness. And I think you can reckon this feeling also here in the so-called developed countries. And what are the causes of these insecurities? Well, the answer unfortunately lies before us. About 2.2 billion people live in conflict-affected areas. There are healthcare disparities, leaving vulnerable population exposed, and last but not least, climate change has increased its impact. And as being the Chief Sustainability Officer of Generali, I have a very clear view of how climate change has become one of the main factors increasing this sense of insecurities. Please consider that 3.6 billion people are at risk, are vulnerable. And don't think about developing countries. Think about Italy, think about Venice. We are all at risk. And the urgency of addressing climate change has become evident and undeniable to every citizen. And thanks to the Human Development Report, we saw, and I really hope you had a look to the report, because we saw that almost 70% of interviewed people are willing to give up some of their own personal income to fight climate change, which overall is a very great news. But they also think that only 43% would do so. So we don't believe in each other. We don't believe that others will act on climate change. And what is the consequence of this perception gap? The consequence is that there is like misconception, disinformation, and I do think that opportunities like this one of having like a broad view of what is going on in the world will really help to fight misconception and disinformation. This is key. And what is the role of the insurance sector? Well, the insurance sector provides a peace of mind. And as Generali, we have a role, and we reckon that we can play a role as responsible investor, responsible insurer, responsible employer, and responsible citizen through our foundation. And really more deeper, we can provide concrete solutions to fight climate change, to fight inequalities, and to give prevention and protection. So what can we do? Let's have a look at the insurance protection gap. I think you know that about a quarter of climate-related catastrophe losses in Europe are not covered. So this is a burden on the shoulder of governments that have to step in to provide relief or cover losses in the aftermath of a catastrophe. More in general, what is the opportunity for the insurance sector? What is the opportunity for an insurance player? I see a great opportunity to choose cooperation over competition. A cooperation with whom? Well, first of all, with peers. We are part, for example, of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. So with peers, we cooperate to really reduce the carbon footprint of the companies in which we invest. Second, with the public sector. While private insurance sector can provide extensive expertise in prompt loss prevention and payouts, public authorities can improve the legal framework and act as a reinsurer of last resort. So cooperation, again, is key. With all this in mind, we signed a multi-year partnership with UNDP. And the results are already showing. As Emma mentioned just a few days ago, we launched SME Enterprise program in Asia. SME Enterprise is the overall program of Generali, really focused on fostering the culture of sustainability among SMEs to make sure they have a positive impact on people, planet, and they keep profitability, because being sustainable means also to be profitable. And we launch a platform, is a SME loss prevention framework that offers guidance to businesses to protect their operation in the face of climate challenges. Promoting a culture of sustainability among SMEs, for us, is really about being sustainable and really fostering resilience of the overall community. So in conclusion, I'm confident this event will be a relevant building block in the construction of cooperation. And again, thank you so much for all of you for being here, and in particular to the speakers that really will add value to this discussion and will help us to fight against misconception and disinformation. I do think that together we can break the gridlock mentioned by the Human Development Report and forge a path together towards a better world for all. So thank you so much. And now let me leave the floor to Marcos Neto, UN Assistant Secretary General, for a video message. Thank you again for being here.
Buongiorno, benvenuti a tutti. Excellence, colleagues, thank you for attending the European launch of the 2023-2024 Human Development Report. I would like to extend my gratitude to the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Generali, and the Human Safety Net Foundation for their support in launching this report at the home of Human Safety Net in Procurazie Vecchie. This year, as the world comes together in the Summit of the Future, we have a unique opportunity to reimagine multilateralism, to reshape the world kneecapped by polarization and distrust. Stronger cooperation and commitment is needed more than ever for prioritizing action on shared global challenges ranging from climate change to peace building to end poverty and inequality. The 2023-2024 Human Development Report invites us to start the much-needed conversation about what a 21st century architecture for cooperation should look like, to make the world inclusive and a safer place with more choice and less threats. There is hope. We have seen how the power of innovative thinking, commitment, and strong leadership can lead to transformative change. For example, the establishment of the new Loss and Damage Fund at COP28, for which more than 3 billion people are set to benefit. With the European Union, UNDP is supporting over 80 countries to scale up sustainable finance and investments for fulfilling the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Together with Generali, UNDP is making efforts to boost access to insurance and risk finance solutions, which may help reduce feelings of insecurity and enhance well-being of vulnerable communities and people. UNDP, together with the UN system, is providing technical assistance to about 20 countries that will or may hold elections in 2024. This work is focused on preparing electoral management bodies for new risks, such as disinformation and digital violence, strengthen the capacity of historically excluded populations to participate effectively in electoral processes, and enhances whole-of-society responses to promote information integrity. I would like to end by saying that the world can be a better place if each one of us is committed to doing our bit. Reimagined cooperation is up to us all. I look forward to following your discussions and wish you a very successful event today. Grazie mille.
So thank you to Lucia and to Marcos Neto for kind of opening up a little bit our thinking around these topics. And of course, the themes are the ones that we will be going deeper in now. So it's about public-private partnership, it's about managing risk, it's about sustainable finance. So I think now we'd like to move on to getting the perspective of the Italian government. I want to thank Minister Plenipotentiary Roberto Colaminè for being here with us today, but also I think I would like to thank the prefect here, Mr. Pellos, for being here with us, and the military institutions of the city, because I think it's very interesting now to hear from the Deputy Director General of the Directorate for Development Cooperation their perspective from somebody who's actually been on the ground in many of the countries that are discussed in the report and who has seen directly, I think, some of the effects in terms of migration and regions like sub-Saharan Africa, among many others. So I'm really looking forward. Ministry Plenipotentiary, please, if you could join me on stage here, I will pass the word to you. Thank you.
Good morning, and I wish to acknowledge the head of the Sustainability Office, Lucia Silva, and the president, of course, of the executive director of the Human Safety Net Foundation, Emma Usich, all the representatives of institutions and other international organizations present here, and all of you. Of course, Italy is proud of the fruitful partnership between the Generali and UNDP. It is an example of how private sector and international organizations may work together to contribute to the analysis of the world situation, a situation that we face today, and that led us to the launch, for the second time, the European launch of the Human Development Report. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Director General of Development Cooperation, I wish also to acknowledge and commend the work of the Human Safety Net Foundation. The results that in essence have been already presented of the report are very clear and in a way disturbing. The fact is that some areas of the world are moving faster in the recovery after the COVID crisis, while others are struggling. And actually, we are not filling the gap between the two so far. So despite the overall value of the Human Development Report Index is increasing, there is a situation where multiple crises and other elements actually conduce to a difference between the top of the ranking and the bottom of the ranking. In the situation where we are faced by erratic some developments in the international situation, like the war in Ukraine, the aggression of Ukraine, and the crisis of Gaza, this situation becomes even more dangerous because of the risk of polarization. This is why Italy believes and put at the center of its development cooperation the notion of human security. We are aware, we are convinced of the fact that humanitarian action, support for peace, respect for human rights, and development are interconnected. And most importantly, they have to be brought forward to prevent crises and conflicts. This is why we promote a notion of human security that is, in its broader sense, including protection, empowerment, and solidarity. And also the reason why we center our cooperation effort on the notion of people, as in our triennial document of strategic perspective that is being adopted currently, putting social justice and the rule of law at the center of our action. We are also aware that the root causes of conflict are often discrimination, marginalization, and lack of respect for human rights. And that this is a reason why we also support actively the pursuit of the SDG 16, peace, justice, and inclusive society for sustainable development, for which we organize or co-organize conferences yearly, the last one held in Rome and the next one to be held on 6th of May 2024 in New York. In the context of the G7 presidency, we have elected to adopt some deliverables that we consider concrete and effective in a specific situation we're facing. The first one is food security. It's no mystery how this particular aspect, rather the insecurity that is felt in many areas of the world, whether because of wars, environmental events, or other sort of crisis, is one of the main drivers of migration, but also of instability. Infrastructure, it is absolutely clear how the main request coming from many countries is the support in producing infrastructure, gender equality. We are acutely aware, especially in some contexts, I won't mention the countries, but you know very well from the press reports in which countries there is also almost conducted a gender war against women. Education, which we consider essential with training to produce a workforce and opportunity of employment, and accountability. And I mention accountability, which is often considered a rather technical issue, because accountability is linked to the representation of what is actually being done around the world. I do realize that sometimes the full extent of the activities realized by the development cooperation around the world is not known at the public opinion. There is a gap between what is being done on the ground and what is known. And what is known not only to the public opinion of the countries who are actually conducting these activities, but also to the public opinion of the countries or of the communities who are receiving these activities. And this is a very important point. Also, in the perspective of the fact that we have to be aware of a situation where there is, as has been pointed out, a difficulty in a perception of being left behind, which requires a collective effort to make clear what is being done and what can be done further in the future. Now, we have to be aware of the fact that ODA resources, the official development aid resources alone, cannot develop or trigger unsustainable development on the scale that is needed. So we have to consider that foreign direct investments and remittances are economic dimensions that are sometimes in excess of the official development aid. And all our effort from now on has to be aimed at using the grants or the concessional resources to offer direct assistance where it's necessary, especially in the humanitarian sector, but also to become the most precious element to trigger other economic forces to create development. And from this point of view, if we go back to the 2015, also the Addis agenda, we realized that we had to raise also resources from the same communities that are involved in the process of development. One of the ways to do this is also the promotion of a system, one of the ways of insurances. Insurances supported also or conducted with the support of the official development aid or other international organization assistance from a technical point of view may actually be a way to intervene when situations of crisis arise before and after in the phase of reconstruction. Coming back to other issues of current relevance, I would say that we have to really face this expression, this perception of not belonging, perception of being disenfranchised. And this is one also of the reasons why the Italian government is launching this encompassing approach to Africa, which is being referred to as Plan Mattei for Africa. It is a way to engage our interlocutors, starting from the idea that all of the economic forces have to be involved in their development, and that to be involved in their development, in our common development, I would add, on the basis of dialogue conducting at the level of parity, of equality. And that's the reason why we have so many engagement with African countries currently and in the most recent months, and in the next future. I mean, the Director General I'm representing today, my colleague Stefano Gatti, is currently with a delegation in Eastern Africa to discuss some large plans that involve development cooperation and other sector of society, of the Italian system, to create large-scale investment in the area. So, in conclusion, I would just say that we will continue to do our part to support multilateralism, which we believe is the way to include all these, all those who are actually feeling in a way excluded from the growth of the planet, and not only to engage them in knowing what we are doing and what we intend to do, but also to actually fill the gap in material and economic terms and social terms to move forward together with them. Thank you.
Thank you to Roberto Colaminè for bringing us the perspective of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy. I think we are evolving now to see that there is so much that must be done, bringing together all the different strands, not just from a country perspective, but working together. And now we have two important messages from people who represent multilateral organizations. First, we have Fabrizia Lepecorella, Deputy Secretary General, OECD. And I think here it's interesting because OECD countries have good progress on the development index, but it's interesting to see what do you do about that, because that cannot be seen in isolation from other countries that do not. So first of all, OECD. And then we have the word of the permanent representative of Italy to the UN, Ambassador Maurizio Massari. So let's see.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you for the European launch of the latest Human Development Report, and I regret not being able to do so in person. Throughout significant global transformations and recent crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, war, conflict, and the cost of living crisis, the Human Development Report, first launched in 1990, remains a trusted, consistent, and reliable initiative to measure human well-being and social progress. This is work that has inspired many, including the OECD, to look at societal progress from a more holistic perspective, measuring human well-being and inclusion alongside macroeconomic fundamentals. In 2011, we launched the OECD Wellbeing Framework, which looks at the many dimensions of what makes a good life and at the inequalities within these dimensions. And today, over 70% of our members develop their own well-being initiatives and frameworks. More recently, in 2020, we launched the OECD Center for Wellbeing, Inclusion, Sustainability and Equal Opportunities, the WISE Center. Ongoing work of WISE highlights that, especially amid crisis, we need to retain a focus on helping people meet their needs and enable their aspirational opportunities, especially for those in vulnerable situations. The climate emergency is a case in point. Our work shows that the equity dimension is an indispensable component of the design of climate policy action. It contributes to the dual objective to ensure that vulnerable communities are supported and that the ambition of climate action has the needed citizens' buy-in. As highlighted by the 2023-2024 Human Development Report, it is crucial to break the gridlock and scale collective action to address the most pressing challenges of our time, including inequality, multidimensional deprivation, and the climate crisis. And I am encouraged to see the report proposing concrete suggestions to deliver on this. With that, I wish you a vibrant and fruitful discussion, and I hope to see many of you in November in Rome, where Italy's G7 presidency will host the 7th OECD World Forum on Wellbeing, under the title Strengthening Wellbeing Approaches for a Changing World. The forum will be a great opportunity to continue pushing the frontiers of collective action for inclusive and sustainable well-being. And let me close by expressing my gratitude for the support of our knowledge partner, the Generali Group, and its chairman, Andrea Sironi. Thank you.
Buongiorno, Venezia from New York. I wish to congratulate Generali, its Human Safety Net Foundation and UNDP for organizing this year's European launch of the Human Development Report. Italy, including ourselves at the permanent mission of Italy to the United Nations, has been supporting this partnership between Generali and UNDP. And we are proud to see this cooperation growing further. We are also pleased that Venice was confirmed as a venue of this European launch. This choice recalls the importance of working together to protect and preserve common goods and to put sustainability at the core of our actions at all levels, working also through effective public-private and multi-stakeholders partnerships, like this one, that deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable development is indeed our collective mission. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year's UNDP's Human Development Report offers a comprehensive picture of today's global, interconnected, and multidimensional challenges. Progress in human development is reversing, unfortunately, inequalities are growing, and global shocks and pressures are increasing. From food insecurity to inequalities, from poverty to education, from the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution to financial distress, from war and conflicts to violence against the most vulnerable, we must accelerate actions and reverse these trends. All of us together, governments, international organizations, civil society, the private sector, local actors, academia, women and youth, must step up cooperation and break the gridlock and enhance transformational actions to accelerate on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. All heads of state and government recommitted to this acceleration at the SDG Summit last September here in New York, and now it's time to accelerate actions. Financing and supporting global public goods, building resilience and leaving no one behind are three key actions that we need to pursue together. Italy will certainly continue to play its part for the acceleration of the SDGs globally, in cooperation with our key UN partners such as UNDP, all member states and all key stakeholders. You can continue to count on us, and I'm confident that analyzing together this report will offer us further inputs for global action. I thank you.
Now we're getting to the heart of our event now to really listen from the man himself, so the director and the lead author of the Human Development Report and Index, what is inside it and what we should do about it. But what I find interesting is listening to these speeches, we're already touching many of the points that were raised, and what I very much like is to hear from OECD, well-being. I think this is already an interesting word, which is bringing us away from a pure economic standpoint and adding other elements which are fundamental, right, if we really want to crack this. So this famous gridlock, we want to hear about it, Pedro, from your own voice, please. And maybe, please, Pedro, come join me. We have a Q&A after, so if you're listening and you have ideas for questions, now is the moment to think about them. Thank you, Pedro. Over to you.
Thank you, Emma, Lucia, Roberto, the authorities in Venice. It's a great pleasure to be back to Venice with the very first launch after the global launch that we undertook last week in New York. And this is the second time, but I think we can think of it as a tradition. Can we, Fabio? Can we think of a tradition? Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I think that we should institute a tradition of organizing the European launch of the Human Development Report in Venice every year. So let me pick up on what Emma just said and remind all of us what is this idea of human development. Human development is a very simple idea. It's the idea that people should be able to live lives to their full potential. And what the Human Development Report does every year is to bring this notion and to try to interpret, provide perspectives on some of the contemporary challenges that we confront. And along with this idea of human development, we've also been introducing metrics, numbers, to try to quantify and assess the extent to which the world is progressing or failing to progress, and countries are progressing or failing to progress in living up to this aspiration of enabling people to live lives to their full potential. So one of the perhaps better known indicators that we use is the Human Development Index. It's not a perfect indicator, but it gives a sense, or it's a good proxy for achievements not only in standards of living, so how well the economy is performing, how well people are doing when it comes to earning enough income to live lives to their full potential, but also looks at achievements in health and education. So this graph shows the path of the Global Human Development Index since we started in 1990. And you can see, actually, it goes only to 99, but if you go back, you see essentially the same line. So it's a very boring kind of story, right? It's improvement, steady improvement, but something has changed. Something has changed, as you can see, in 2019. So in 2019, we started to see, for the first time ever, a decline in the global path of Human Development Index for 2 years in a row. So this was the headline finding of our last report. And you can see that over the last 2 years, 2022, 2023, there's sort of a recovery. So there's good news here, that things are sort of back on track, or at least back improvement. But you can also see that there is a gap between what we could have expected had the trend pre-2019 had continued and the trend that we are currently on. So if this gap persists into the future, what we're confronting is the potential for permanent losses in human development, permanent losses in human potential. So this is the first headline finding of our report that I would like you to retain. Yes, things are improving, but we risk a permanent loss in human development globally if we do not manage to fill this gap. Secondly, there's been, for the first time in many years, an increase in the difference between the Human Development Index of the countries at the very top, those that we classify as having very high levels of human development, or the Human Development Index, and those at the very bottom. So you can see that for many years, this actually goes back to 1990, there's been a sharp reduction in this difference, meaning that countries at the bottom were actually catching up, converging to the levels of the Human Development Index of the countries at the top. But look at what happened in recent years since 2020. This trend has reversed. When I first saw these numbers, I had to ask my colleagues to, do the recalculation. I could not believe it. I could not believe that when we have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, that includes the pledge to leave no one behind, and to reach the furthest behind first, for those familiar with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, that's what the text says. That's what countries agreed to. Member states of the United Nations signed up to. And look at what's happening in reality. So the question is why? And of course there are many reasons, but our report suggests that one of the crucial reasons is the fact that we are not able to manage interdependencies. We are not able to manage the reality of being in a connected planet. And this was evidenced in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's also reflected in the fact that going forward, some of these connections, some of these interdependencies are likely to not only persist, but deepen, at least in two ways. First, we already heard about climate change, but it's not only climate change. It's biodiversity loss, it's pollution. There are many issues that cross borders. So this idea that we can manage this interdependence, that we can manage globalization by looking only at what we can do at the border, for instance, managing trade, the flow of goods and services by making decisions about what we do at the borders, or the movement of people, or the movement of capital and finance. This is sort of the challenge of globalization that persists. But the reality that we live in a shared planet cannot be managed by making decisions at the border. So this is one of the new realities that we need to accept, that are going to heighten this interdependence and call for even more reason for us to manage this interdependence together. And the second is the fact that we are actually living in a context in which we are much more connected through cyberspace. So this is a graph that shows connections associated with Twitter. And you can see that the global map of cyberspace looks very different from the physical map of borders. So these are the two trends that are likely to making the management of interdependence even more relevant going forward. And what we see is that we are stuck in a gridlock. And the reality of being stuck in the gridlock is that people suffer. I already gave you some numbers related to the Human Development Index, and here are a few more related to this human toll of gridlock. The level of forced displacement and the level of fatalities in state-based conflicts has been increasing in recent years, and it's now at virtually unprecedented levels. And it's not only that people suffer. This reality, this gridlock, also sows division and polarization. One of the most striking findings of our report is what you see on this graph. So this graph shows, on the horizontal axis, the percentage of the population that supports democracy, that likes to live in a democracy. And on the vertical axis, the percentage of the population, global population, that would support leaders that may undermine it. So what does the graph show? The graph shows that the percentage of people that like to live in democracy is very high and stable, around 90%. But you can see that the line sort of drifted upwards over the course of this century. So what does this mean? This means that more and more people over the course of this century support leaders that may undermine democracy. And in fact, we cross the 50% threshold. A majority of the global population today would support such leaders. So this is an illustration of the challenges that we already heard a little bit about, and is related to this idea of polarization. Polarization is very different from people having different views about what's best for society. It's good that people have different views about what's best for society. People have different ideologies. That's good. It's not only good, it's essential to manage a context of uncertainty. You need that difference. You need different ideas. You need innovation. You need change. How can change come about if everybody thinks the same way? That's not the problem. The problem is when you have polarization, when you have people that segregate into groups across a number of issues, seemingly unrelated, and lose the ability to talk to one another. This is one of the reasons, in our view, we make the argument in the report, that results in this gridlock that harms collective action both within countries and across countries, as we unfortunately see when we look at the international context. So what to do? The report has three ideas to propose. First, Lucia already mentioned these numbers. It's important to recognize that half of the global population today, so 1 in 2 people, do not feel in control of their lives, and 2/3 or thereabouts do not feel that their voice is heard in their political system. These are global numbers. So this points to the importance of looking, Emma mentioned well-being, so I already spoke a lot about well-being and the importance of putting an emphasis on well-being. It's not only about income or how the economy is performing, important though that is, it's about a broader notion of well-being. But what this data shows us is that in addition to well-being, we need to look also at the extent to which people feel empowered, feel in control of their lives. And of course, improving well-being is part of it, but it's not necessarily the whole story. the focus of our policies today, be it the development policies, be it social policies in our countries, it's very much focused on improving people's welfare, well-being, and that's important. But what this suggests, it's also important to look at how to enhance people's empowerment. In the human development language, we use the word agency. Amartya Sen used to use this expression, with one of the people that inspired human development, perhaps the leading person inspiring human development. He said that we should look at people not as patients, but agents of change. And see how we often think about our programs. We speak about beneficiaries, right? So we are doing something to people so that they are beneficiaries of our interventions. Of course, that's important. But sometimes we fail to recognize the importance of looking at them also as agents of change. And one of the reasons why people feel this way, we find, is these perceptions of insecurity. You can see on this chart that on the horizontal axis, you see the extent to which people feel more insecure. So as you move from the left to the right, you move from people that have low perceptions of insecurity to medium to very high perceptions of insecurity. As people feel more insecure, you see that this gap in agency, this perception of the inability of being in control of people's lives, increases. So Roberto mentioned the importance of having this notion of human security, which I think it's critical, because human security is about the ability of people to live lives free from fear, free from want, and free from living in indignity. So it complements notions of territorial security with this idea that it's people-centered and the ability of people to live lives in which they feel empowered and protected, and also a sense of solidarity with their community and with the broader human family, if you want to use that expression. And here I'll make a parenthesis to emphasize the importance of insurance, because insurance is a crucial tool to enable people to feel less insecure. It's not a silver bullet that is going to solve the problem, but it's a very important tool. Both private insurance and the role of Generali and the partnership UNDP is particularly important here, but also social insurance. So thinking about insurance is one of the important, expanding insurance, I should say, it's one of the important mechanisms that we can act upon to redress these perceptions of insecurity. So this is the first area of action. Second area of action, Lucia has already mentioned this number, is this notion of misperceptions. So I'm not going to repeat the numbers that you heard from Lucia, but I will say that these misperceptions are widespread, for instance, when it comes to gender. The report also speaks about this. So the question is, that is posed is, do you think that women should be allowed to work outside the home? 90% plus of people around the world say yes to this question. And then they are asked, and if you had to guess, what do you believe people in your community or in your country think about this? It drops dramatically. So this idea that we actually agree on more than we think is crucial, recognizing this. Why? Why does it matter? Because no matter how committed you individually are, and I'm sure many on this audience are committed individually to sustainability, for instance, or to gender equality, these are problems that cannot be addressed by an individual alone, or even by a country alone, no matter how committed a country is to these causes. They require collective action. So what we believe others around us think of these issues matters crucially, and this is one of the ways in which we can break through this fog of polarization by recognizing that people actually agree on more than they think. And then finally, and I will stop, I'm coming close to the end, in the international context, the importance of recognizing not that countries all of a sudden will wake up and agree on everything, or even on most things. It's important to recognize that countries have different resources, different interests, disputes, and those will continue. Those will not go away. But that is not incompatible with the idea that it's important to recognize that there are areas in which countries need to come together and cooperate. Because there are areas in which what countries decide to do are not zero-sum. In other words, what one country gains is not necessarily at the expense of another country losing. And one of the ways of thinking about these issues, so what are these issues, so that it's not something aspirational or abstract, is by invoking the notion of global public goods, which in the language of economics are non-rival and non-excludable at the global level. In other words, these are things on which we can all benefit from, and a country benefiting from a global public good does not attract another country from doing the same. And the failure to do so, and this is what the graph shows, is if we think of challenges like climate change, so addressing climate change is a global public good. If we fail to do so, what we confront is a world in which there might be an explosion of inequality. So this chart shows the change in deaths under high emission scenario across different regions. And you see that while in some regions you're likely to see a decline in these deaths, in others we're going to see an increase and the gap is going to widen. So even if we're interested in development, in combating this divergence that I started with and moving us into a world of convergence, the provision of these global public goods is not only something that can be considered important from an efficiency perspective, but it's also crucial from an equity perspective and from a development perspective. So I'll stop here with reminding you of the first sentence of our Human Development Report, which is a very simple sentence, but I think it's a sentence that captivates or encapsulates, I should say, the key message that we want to convey with this report, which is, we can do better than this. Thank you. Okay, so I was told that now I'm supposed to answer questions. Let's see, anyone? Okay, yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Ella. Thank you for the very interesting presentation, also to your presenter. My name is Jeremy Siak. I'm from Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, also based here in Venice. I was interested in your first slide when you showed that there is a global progress in Human Development Index, and there was this COVID crisis, pandemic, that has put us on a different development pathway. I was just thinking, but all the trends that have been mentioned this morning, the climate change that already has the impact, biodiversity losses, inequalities, that should be somehow reflected in the trend line that you have, right? The trend line that you compare the difference during the COVID is already subjected to those losses that we have compared to an ideal or better, but more sustainable pathway. I was just thinking about how to factor in also those losses, not punctuation of the global crisis as we have seen during the COVID or financial crisis before or whatever, but really see the difference between where we could be if we were more sustainable and how it would look like in the Human Development Index trend, the theoretical trend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's a very important question. And in fact, the last slide I showed is, in a sense, an answer to that question. So if we look at the trend, the backward trend, we don't see it. But looking forward, when we do projections, it becomes very clear that this is going to be major drivers of inequality, and perhaps one in which we're going to have even lower path of human development. So some of the work that we're doing in our office, if you have a chance, just Google Human Climate Horizons, which is a platform that enables us to see how the prospects for human development are likely to be shaped in the context of a planet that is changing. Currently, this platform looks only at projections for the implications of climate change, and we look at implications on mortality, which was the data that I showed, labor supply, energy consumption. We're going to have other variables related, for instance, to food production, displacement, what is this going to imply for the movement of people. And it's I would say, a central element of the work that we're currently doing. So thank you for the question, and it's an opportunity for me to share some of the work that we are doing to address it. Yes, thank you. You can Google human climate horizons on your phone. You'll see it.
Good morning. My name is Tamsir Njai. I'm here representing 2030. My question goes towards the difference in the gap between the rich and the poor. Moving from MDGs to SDGs, I realized that achieving sustainability, it is all based on equality and cooperation. My question here goes, understanding the trends of the MDGs, seeing the targets of the SDGs, proves that cooperation is the deal. But when looking at the developed and the poor countries, the trend has been through aid or support. It has not been collaboration. With the SDGs, what forms of collaboration are in place towards the poor countries? This is my question.
Thank you. Well, one of the things we argue is that in addition to thinking of humanitarian assistance, which is focused on saving lives during emergencies, and development assistance, which is focused on providing support to low-income countries, we have to figure out a way of financing and providing support to these global public goods. And Roberto already mentioned it. You know, ODA is not going to do it. It's going to play an important role, but the financial envelopes of official development assistance are limited, and they face several constraints. So we have to figure out, we argue, for what we call a third track that supplements financial, that supplements humanitarian assistance and development assistance. Because if you're asking a country, a low-income country, to do something to address a global challenge, it could be climate change, it could be the control of a pandemic or a virus that is causing a pandemic. Of course, a country has an interest to do this on its own behalf, but it's also doing it on behalf of the international community. So it seems only fair and efficient, actually, for the international community to support, perhaps not the full amount, but perhaps support the incremental cost that the country will incur by providing investments or undertaking investments that benefit not only the country, which should happen, but also the international community. So that's why we argue, you saw in the video, for thinking about a new institutional architecture for the provision of these global public goods. So this is one of the proposals that we have in the report. Okay. Oh, there are so many.
Thank you for granting me the floor. As a woman, I would also like to say something. My name is Isabella Maveglia. I'm a cultural entrepreneur, and I'm the ex-president of Beta Italia, which is a national branch of the International Association, Bringing Europeans Together Association. My question is, what is the role of cultural entrepreneurship and creating a positive cycle of positive externalities while creating new jobs and propositions? And what is the role of youth activists and movements to create a more sustainable future and creating positive cycles of change? And what is the role of intergenerational change? So how can we give space to the youth, not only in activist movements, but creating new job opportunities, economic change, and green and circular economies as in line with the UN SDGs? Thank you so much.
It's 3 questions, but I will try to answer all 3 in one go. I think the premise of your question is so important, and it's so neglected, particularly when it comes to gender equality or interventions that seek to advance gender equality. Because so many of the interventions that we do, including our own interventions, in the development community, are premised on the idea that if you change formal institutions, the problem is solved. So if you change the law so that it eliminates discriminatory laws and practices, that the problem is solved. And of course, it's essential to do that, to eliminate anything that is discriminatory that exists in the law. But assuming that by doing that, you're going to redress the challenges of gender inequality has been proven misguided. I'll give you an example. In our office, we introduced an index that quantifies biases against gender equality reflected in social norms. So not in the law, but in social norms. How do we come up with these numbers? How do we come up with these indices? It's not by asking people whether they are for or against gender equality. Because if you ask most people on this audience or on the street, Piazza San Marco, whether they are for or against gender equality, most likely they will say, I'm for gender equality, of course. But if you ask them questions like, who do you think makes a better political leader? Who do you think makes a better executive in a firm? Who do you think should be given priority when there is a recession? Systematically, people around the world respond, men, boys, men. In fact, by our index, 90% of the global population harbors at least one bias against gender equality, 90%. And then this is reflected in outcomes. For instance, in the political realm, we know that virtually around the world, there is no discrimination between men and women when it comes to voting, which is a big conquest, and in many places hasn't happened that long ago. You might be surprised to find out. And yet, as you move towards positions of higher and higher political power, you see the percentage of men increasing. In fact, when you go to heads of state and government, Italy is an exception at the moment, we find that 90% of leaders, political leaders at the highest office, holding the highest office, are men. So there's sort of, we call it a gradient, right? As you move towards positions of high political power, you have the gradient. This cannot be explained by formal discrimination, because it doesn't exist. But it's a reflection of the social norms that are so hard to change. So to the bit of your question, I think the work that you do, and organizations like ours, in changing social norms is culture. In changing what's acceptable, what people find acceptable is culture, is central. Thank you. I'm off the hook? I'm off the hook. Emma said I'm off the hook. One last one.
Maybe one last, like 2 minutes.
Okay.
One question, one quick answer.
Okay. Oh, so many.
One.
Okay, there.
One last.
One last one.
Ciao a tutti, sono Amena, sono dall'Afghanistan. Okay, I'm from Afghanistan, and I have a question because as a refugee, this is necessary to I have information about this section. Because this is a human development report, I want to know I don't want to know about all around of the world. Just I want to know from UNDP in this section in Italy, because I think the refugee in Italy needs some program to development. I want to know, and I want to ask if you didn't have before, you can have in the future some program for the refugee about the development of community of refugee in Italy or no? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's more a question about what we, UNDP, do programmatically. Our focus on when it comes to programs is in low and middle income countries, so we don't have programs in countries like Italy. But I think part of UNDP's role and the value of this report is also to bring some of these issues, some of these challenges that are shared globally and universal to the attention of everyone. So I'll mention another example of misperceptions, which actually has to do with misperceptions around migration. We already heard about climate change, I mentioned gender. So when it comes to migration, and again, this is something that happens everywhere, not only in Italy. I actually don't have data for Italy, but for the countries in which we have data, there's a huge gap between the extent to which people believe there is migration and the actual factual migration. And it's very interesting that this perception gap does not depend on income, does not depend on the level of education, does not depend on gender, and it's really widespread. So I think that one of the things that it's important for us to do to manage the challenge and the opportunity, actually, of migration, including forced displacement, people like refugees, is by addressing these misperceptions. I think it's difficult to do, both in Europe and in the United States, but given the pervasiveness and the extent of these misperception gaps, I think that this is an area that is ripe for interventions, including by organizations like the one we heard. Civil society, I think, has a very important role to play in highlighting this misperception gap. Thank you. Okay.
So now we've understood what the report says. I would say comes the difficult part, because we have a panel where we will try and bring some solutions. So this is the European presentation of the Human Development Report, and we could not have, I think, this moment of discussion without hearing the voice of the European Commission. So we have connected from Brussels Arianna Vannini, who's the chief economist of the DG International Partnership. Let's see if she's already connected, because I think what would be very interesting is to have a few remarks from her, who's been following the discussion, as to, we discussed common public. Good morning. Hello, Arianna. Can you hear us? Hello. Yes. Thank you for joining us. We said we could not have this discussion with it hearing the voice and the perspective of Europe on some of the important topics that we've been covering. So public goods, this concept of agency. How can people feel more a part of the decision-making process and feel like they can have control of their lives, but also the role of information? How can we make people understand and know what is happening and how they can be a part of it? So what is the perspective from your viewpoint, and in particular around this concept, I think also very interesting, of public-private partnerships? Over to you for a remark.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you for this invitation. I'm really delighted to be able this morning to join this distinguished panel, and I am deeply sorry I could not be with you in person. What I can say that the areas that have just been highlighted in the question entirely resonate in our perspective, and the challenges they posed are addressed in our strategy, which I'm sure is well known. It's the European Union Global Gateway Strategy, which is a comprehensive framework for the European Union external action in an evolving and complex international context. And what it is about, it is not about only infrastructure. It is about accelerating the twin and digital transition in partner countries, but precisely for what has just been highlighted. It does so with a 360-degree package, addressing also the improvement in regulatory frameworks, and it is anchored in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. So this strategy covers both the hard connectivity, as I was saying, and the broader enabling environment, including technology transfer, know-how, skills, and education. And it's a strategy based on key principles such as democratic values, high standards, for example, on environmental, social, sustainability aspects, good governance and transparency, and of course, last but not least, equal partnership. To make this intervention a bit more concrete, I would like to focus on examples on how the human development priorities, the human development dimension, is actually enshrined in the Global Gateway approach. And I will start with the health sector, whose importance has become even more evident during the pandemic. And one standout example is the initiative that Global Gateway is addressing to build a better capacity for vaccine, medicines, and health technology and manufacturing in Africa. And work is underway in some countries, and these are Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, and Ghana. Then I would like to mention education, which of course is a key ingredient. We do invest in teachers, girls' education, and skills, but we pay a particular attention to young people through our Youth Action Plan to engage, empower, and connect youth worldwide, therefore contributing to narrow the agency gap of the young generation. And I couldn't agree more with what Pedro Conceição just said about the importance of agency. We see more and more the young generation actually not feeling committed, not feeling represented. So the focus on youth for us is really crucial. When it comes to the digital sector, Global Gateway contributes to tackle the digital divide by promoting a human-centric and inclusive model of digitalization. And we do have programs that are designed to improve access to e-service and participation in society for all, and it contributes to reduce the gender divide and to increase resilience. But furthermore, a reference was made just a few minutes ago on the key role of civil society. We couldn't agree more. Civil society involvement in Global Gateway is key. We could not do without it if we really want to leave no one behind and to support key principles enshrined in the strategy.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. So I think in order, we have some other speakers on the panel, including from civil society and I think interesting voices that I think you mentioned and could be probably an amplifier of the messages you brought to us. I would just say if you maybe can make a closing remark, I think we need to move on to here. So we give everybody a chance. Sorry. Thank you.
I was at the end.
Thank you.
Just I wanted to refer to civil society precisely because it was just mentioned. So finally, the EU acts in a Team Europe approach, together with member states, international and European financial institutions, joining resources and expertise to achieve common objectives. But as public resources alone cannot address these huge global challenges, we create partnerships with an ever-growing set of stakeholders. And of course, a key partner is the private sector that plays a fundamental role in bridging the investment gap, but also equally important in sharing knowledge and expertise and developing skills on the ground in partner countries. I would have just touched upon inequalities, which is dear to our heart as well, but I leave it like that because I understand that it's not enough time. And thank you for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Arianna. Thank you very much. So I think Arianna gave us an overview of what is in Europe the perspective of this, and we touched upon many interesting ideas about agency, the role of youth, and to discuss this and close this morning, I would like to invite some people on stage with me here, starting from Paola Berbeglia, who's the president of Concord, Italy. Please, if you'd like to take a seat. Robert Böhm, who's professor of psychology, University of Vienna. Monica Biglio, who's professor of econometrics at University Ca' Foscari here in Venice. And finally, Aghele Mohammadi, who is a student at the University of Padova and also part of our program A2030. When I say our, I mean the Human Safety Net has been partnering with this organization called A2030. Please take a seat. Who is taking care of making sure that students who are displaced and need to start over in their new country of destination, in this case Italy, can continue their studies and achieve their full potential. So welcome everybody. We have quite a feat for two reasons. One is that I think people are curious to hear what we all do, each in our space, to kind of address some of the challenges that Pedro has so well described in the report. And also find some solutions. So let's see. I'd like to start, I think, from Paola. Paola, you are the president of this association called Concord Italy, and you're part of this European Concord. You have more than 3,000 civil society organizations, NGOs that are a part of it, so we're talking here civil society. So what do you think should be the role, could be the role of civil society in addressing some of these issues? Also from your perspective, I understand you are a cognitive anthropologist. I think this is a really interesting one to understand for us. So yeah, tell us, what do you think could be the role of civil society here?
Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation to Generali and Human Safety Net, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UNDP, obviously. And okay, as anthropologists, I would like to invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Try to imagine what makes you feel most uncomfortable. Now try to think that we normally tend to look for the reason for this discomfort after putting it on something outside of us, because if it were inside of us, probably it would make us afraid. Think of an illness, for example. Now open your eyes. And in this sense, so our first defense mechanism is absolutely the projective one. We defend ourselves, we separate, we section, we divide, we split mentally and physically, so we can react against. So this is where polarization comes from. This is one of the main reasons of the report, no? From the idea that the other is the cause of my discomfort. So how to cope with discomfort? The need is to change one's mind may arise from the fact that when a force, a strain is greater than us, then we need cooperation in order to not be overwhelmed, obviously. So, as the report clearly showed, in a world at a crossroad of international cooperation efforts are absolutely critical to helping people around the world to cope with this impact of climate change, etc., etc. Concord, as you said, is a federation of CSOs. So we have three main action points, actually. Three proposals, if you want. One is an EU strategy to safeguard civic space around the world. Exactly as it was mentioned. Maintaining the civic space because organized civil society makes the difference between dictatorship and democracy everywhere. So taking the idea in this sense of a global partnership for co-development, using exactly this. And this is important from the point of view of data. The Civic Space Monitor in 2023 showed that only 2.1% of the world's population lives in countries where open civic space is in. Just 2.1, super low. You know? So out of 198 countries addressed, just 118 have severe limitation of civic space. So just ironic, as you can imagine. And in this sense, addressing the ODA dimension, ODA, to the organized civil society is a way of escaping this question.
And of addressing the agency gap, I guess.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And from a political point of view, a policy perspective, we are supporting the idea of coherence of policy as a cornerstone. We cannot just act in pillars, in strands. It's important to coordinate, having a validation, having a monitoring, having a global governance on this, involving multi-stakeholder partners in this sense. And last but not least, let me mention what is multi-stakeholder in this sense. The need to maturate a knowledge to global citizenship, exactly as she showed before. And it's just passing through, putting ourselves in the shoes of the others. This is the only way. UNESCO defined global citizenship education very well, but I think that what is important is it aims to respond to the challenges exactly of human rights violations.
So it's about self-awareness. So it's not always somebody else. It's me and what can I do?
And this is very important because absolutely through global citizenship education, we can mention back in 2007, transcend the paradigm of methodological nationalism, the polarization.
And polarization. I will stop you. Yeah. I'm sorry, I will have to stop you because I really want to hear now, because I think a lot of the things you raised, how are we going to get out of that? We need a psychologist, right? I think we do. So, Robert Böhm, professor of psychology. What I'm personally very fascinated in this discipline is behavioral, the behavioral psychology aspects, and how do you also influence and design processes in order to, get certain outcomes? I guess this is a field where you've been studying a lot. And what can you tell us about polarization? How can we manage it in a way that the outcomes are positive?
I'm not sure whether I can keep up to the high expectations, but let me try. So I guess it was mentioned by you now, but also by Pedro earlier. I mean, polarization in itself is, you could say it's not so bad because people care, right? So the first thing is people engage into political issues, but the problem is once this becomes more than an opinion, but becomes a group membership where people identify with, then we are beyond the point that we can discuss, right? And the question is, what can we do with that, right? Because we want to have those people on the table, right? We want to have people with diverse opinions discussing solutions for the big challenges we have. But if they are polarized, they are not willing to be even in the same room with each other, right? And so, I mean, in the past, we have now documented a lot, and part of this is also mentioned in the Human Development Report. What are such reasons for these polarization, the group memberships that come with it. But the question is, what is the next step? How can we reduce it? And think about, I mean, one of the major determinants of people being willing to cooperate with each other is that they emphasize with each other, right? You need to be able to, and you said that, putting yourself in the shoes of the other, right? You need to be able to feel what other people's concerns are. So how is that possible with some people who now say we need more extreme climate change measures and interventions? Others say we need much less of it. Well, one thing that we discovered in our research and what we are working on is that they share one common thing. And this is the insecurity, what you mention in your report, as well as a big fear about the future. And this now may sound very stupid. How can we I mean, they have fear about different things. Some people have fear about a world that due to climate change we are not able to live in it, or our children. And others are fearful because of decreasing economic conditions, right? They are losing all the things that they and their parents and grandparents have saved for. But they share the fear of the future. So what we are working on now is how can we bring those people together in emphasizing, at least with their fear, to making a starting point for an interaction. I don't have a solution now. I just know that we find something that is very strong to people's identity. It's a commonly shared feeling that they have. And this could be the starting point of an interaction, although the fear that they feel is so opposite in terms of the content it is. But I guess I don't have a better solution for now. So this is maybe I want to close it.
Is this very different between different generations, I guess? Because now then we will move on to discussing the role of youth. I mean, what do you see there between the older generation, the younger? Are they less or more polarized? Where do we start from?
It depends a bit on the context. But in principle, we find very little age-related differences. I think in terms of climate, of course, there are huge differences in terms, of course, those who are younger see more the dangers of their future. But we also know that older people, if they once engage with the topic, they are very much concerned because of their children and grandchildren, yeah? So I think we have just more activism on the younger side, yeah? So many of the younger people get on the streets and protest, but there are also many old people who really care about these issues once they know about it.
Thank you, Professor. So I would like now to move over to Professor Monica Biglio, who's a professor of econometrics at Ca' Foscari here in Venice. And I'm very happy to say that this afternoon we will have a workshop with the students that Monica Biglio has attending one of her courses at the university. What I'd like to ask you, Professor, is you study risk, you study the economy, and you also bring into your teaching and the academic offering of Ca' Foscari the element of sustainability. How do you manage that, and what is the expectation of your students in attending these courses? What do they want? What do they look for, and how do you kind of respond to that need through your academic offering here in Venice?
Okay, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and in particular to talk about what Ca' Foscari can offer on these aspects. I mean, Ca' Foscari, in the last year has really put a lot of attention on the sustainability topics in all the area. In particular, I'm in economics. Econometrics, one piece of economics. I'm in economics. I'm more in finance, and 3 years ago, we started by thinking it was important to have the sustainability driver transversally for all our courses, also in economics. And in particular, we create this course. It is a master course in economics, finance, and sustainability, adding sustainability as a relevant topic for the way in which we prepare our students to be professionists, to be professional in the world, but also to be citizen in the world. And this is really the most important piece of our work. What is expecting our students? Our students clearly are expecting, on one side, to have the good and right competencies to understand what is going on. What is clear nowadays is that we need to take into account sustainability. We need to take into account the climate change, but also the sustainable development, in all its features. This is not only the economic, but it's not only the social or the well-being, let me say, without economics. Both things must be together. If I may say something more, what is relevant for our students is to understand that they also need to be to understand their role as citizen. Before, it is true that students, young people, react more to the climate change. That's true. But on the other side, also, as we heard before, their participation to the politics, public, it's not so high. In some way, it disappeared in this. It is not these days. It is several years. And what is important is that they can understand that they need to participate. Since using something that we said before, we could do better, but they need to do better, since the future is for them, and then they need to do better.
Thank you, Professor. I think it's also about offering opportunities and forums and occasions such as this. And, you know, we make a point also when we do these presentations of the report is that we talk about the role of youth, but we must have youth here on stage because, you know, we can only guess and listen, but I think it's much better if we hear it from them. So, Agele Mohammadi, thank you for joining us up on stage here. So, you come from Afghanistan, Agele, and you are part of this A2030 program that we just mentioned, and you're now studying at the University of Padova. You're a woman, you've experienced displacement, and now you're on a path to building your new life here, but you're not just thinking about yourself, you have done a lot also for other women already back in Afghanistan, but also here you are exactly what I think Professor Billios says she would like to see more of. So what can you tell us from your perspective about what you learned today and what you think youth could and should do more, also from your lived experience?
Firstly, thank you to invite me, and I am very glad to be here with professors. In my opinion, young generation has a significant role to closing and redressing the agency gaps, particularly women. And as we have seen in recent years, they have an increased woman influence in the key areas such as human rights, education, and social transformation. So next leaders who want to be a vanguard of this revolutionary journey must see themselves as an essential component of this change and decision-making process. So, and also they must see themselves as a global citizenship, as a professor says. And this sense of global citizenship is very critical to addressing serious concerns like climate change, peace, and also pandemic that we passed before. From my personal experience, when I started to working in the social activities and developing, I was very, very young with a big dream to make a big change in the society, mostly for women inequality. And that was very hard in the context of Afghanistan, a country with multicultural, still in conflict and war. But after I came to Italy, and then I realized I'm stuck. What am I gonna do here? I don't have my job, I don't have my connection, and also my ideas that I had for the women or people in Afghanistan doesn't work from here. Then I familiar with the A2030 Next Leaders from social and innovation designer, and it's a project for Afghan scholars and refugees in Italy based on a 2030 UN agenda to support and empowerment the student and scholar from Afghanistan. Then through the events and meeting, training course, and one of the best was annual networks in human safety nets, and another future project that we have last week in Venice. I had the opportunity to make networks with other young leaders from different country and background, and the possibility to share my experience. And through the intercultural discussion, I feel something
you feel less
changed.
alone.
Yeah. No, it's changed my perspective to see global concerns and issues. And I learned many new solution and a strategy for solving this problem. So I think for being effective as a young leader, we need to involve ourselves in this intercultural discussion, make strong human networks to have a common ground and cooperation to solve the problem.
Thank you, Gele. I think this is a good message, I think, to leave us with. I know there are a lot of students in the room. One of them, I think, raised the question earlier, and I think you could be an example also of how how this can be done, and this message of agency starting from yourself, but also the need to have a network around you. So the concept, I think, of having potential, but also being put in the situation to express it, which, coming back to the human safety, is what we try to do with our programs, and Generali is also trying to do with the example that we mentioned before, the Malaysia SME event, is how do we empower people so they can manage their risk and plan for their future. And I think, each of you, it was very short, but we kind of brought some contribution to how we can all do this together. And I think the message today is there are big intractable problems, and then that we have all these grassroots, very interesting initiatives that maybe are not necessarily always connected. And probably part of the hardest work of all is that of organizations such as UNDP, but also other bodies that are trying to put all of this together and reach what we also strive to do as Generali in the human safety, which is the scaling of our work, so you can join these very important and authentic grassroots initiatives with the kind of bigger, wider views and policies, which is kind of, I think, probably the main blocking point in breaking this gridlock. And maybe finally, the last observation I'd like to bring, that is also a personal reflection for me today, is do not underestimate the role of information. So how do we make sure that we can translate also some of this research, and I think Pedro did it magnificently today, in a way that is clear, that is data-driven, but also kind of involving enough for people so that they can understand that it is relevant to them, and even more, that they can do something about it. So thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate the time that you put in to be here with us. And what I would invite you to do is, now we have lunch served outside, so please take the time to also reach out to some of the people and maybe continue the conversations personally. We are personally, not personally myself, but I mean, as an organization, today we will have a workshop with the students from Ca' Foscari. Tomorrow, I know we're having a conversation with UNDP and some of the business colleagues of our company, Generali, talking about parametric insurance. So how can we develop insurance solutions to tackle climate change? So to me, these are very important signs. I'm sure there are more in the room, and let's collectively unleash the full potential of all that we can do together. Thank you for today.